monumental miscellanea, and funerary paraphernalia. It's Archaeodeath.
The stone is here. Rocky.
Hello.
Oh, hello. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for joining me. I'm such a fan.
Oh, it's weird. You don't usually get to hear me. You just see me type.
I thought you were going to appear as a stone. I told everyone you would appear as the pebble, as the rock. Sorry, don't want to be offensive.
Oh, I
Use
don't
the
have a
P
stone
word.
about. I should have just got the stone.
So, how are things with you? Are you coping with it all? I hope you're not facing any too much drama, and it's all reasonably.
There's always loads of drama. It's always drama on TikTok somewhere.
Oh, I find it better than X. I was just talking to various academics yesterday at a conference, and first conference I've been to in many years actually, and a small little event, and I was sort of saying about how I prefer TikTok because yes, there's always drama, but it feels more manageable than on various other social media apps. I don't know, but I suppose everyone gets something, don't they? So I mean, I don't know I just wanted to have a chat really, and just have a update and a chin wag about all things stony and all things lithic, all things and where things are up to. But I don't know how much what you feel like talking about or what you'd like to talk about. But I did want to ask you about your brilliant videos and how you come up with all the ideas so rapidly. It's just you've even got a folk song, a whole song dedicated.
Well, I've just been in social media for about 10 years. So as a social media manager, I run other people's accounts.
Oh.
So it's just something I'm very used to. And then I'd messaged about the stone on one of my accounts and I got blocked. So I became upset. And I created this account to get the stone returned.
So it was almost like you got annoyed at the reaction, but you channeled it into positive, humorous, engaging. Because you got that experience, you could channel it in a positive way. I suppose that's really good, isn't it?
Got everyone involved because there was already a movement going on when I got involved. So Thistle Witch had started. I think she's the one that had reached out to you first about it, and there was already a movement there. I'd already done social media for 10 years, so I got involved and decided to start making memes out of it and all of that, and it just kicked off.
Fantastic. Well done for standing up for the cause of the. I mean, I just maybe I could reiterate some things for people who are joining who don't know what we're talking about, and you can add. If I say anything wrong, you can correct me. But would that be okay? Just so I could, because it's before. With these lives, it's always an awkward dynamic. There's always someone going, "What's this about? What's that about?" So if I do a little introduction, then everyone knows. So we're talking about Return the Stone, and this is a bit of an internet phenomenon that began when an American visitor. I'm going to do it in a different way to certain other people. An American visitor visited the Claver Cans, and the Claver Cans are a guardianship monument that were under the jurisdiction and control of the Ministry of Works, then Historic Scotland, now Historic Environment Scotland. So they are a protected, scheduled ancient monument, and the Balnuren site, which I was involved in surveying and excavating nearby with a project led by Professor Richard Bradley of University of Reading in 1996. I said 1995, it's 1996 actually. Is a site that is now known to be early Bronze Age. So in popular parlance, we've heard a lot of people calling it Neolithic. That's a bit wrong now because the datings have come back in the early Bronze Age. It doesn't matter. It's prehistoric. That's what people care about. It's old. And at the Balmurin site, it's part of a broader landscape of monuments, but the sort of four monuments in the Balmura complex, and they are important because they're well preserved. They're the best preserved of a group. And there's two passage graves, a ring cairn and a smaller cairn, I think. I don't know what the exact descriptor of that is. And they are well visited, and they're well visited because they're ancient, well-preserved monuments, but also you're not far from the Culloden battlefield. There's a lot of spiritual, there's been long-term spiritual interest in these monuments. and when I was surveying there in the 90s, we had people meditating there, praying there. We had Jacobite groups coming to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Culloden. Took place while I was doing surveying there. Hello, Kat. So it's a site that has powerful connotations for the Scottish people, if that's a fair thing to say. Not just because it's a prehistoric funerary site, a burial site, a site where the dead were cremated and interred, but a site that has echoed down the centuries. And now it has the Outlander books and TV association as a site that inspired the time travel story of the popular series, right? And so tourists have long come there. It's not new to tourists, right? It's not new to international tourists. Coach loads of tourists would turn up when we were surveying there, and presumably Americans, whoever, were coming. And we even in the 90s, we had some comedy questions. And the comedy questions I remember, and I'm not mocking Americans, but it's like any international tourist will say kind of things that are a bit humorously dumb to someone who has a little bit more knowledge of the area. So please, I'm not mocking, but one of the best American questions we had was, is this where they buried Macbeth? And so we just went, yeah, just right there, because what did you say? And the other anecdote I remember was a South African visitor who visited the excavations, and you've got to understand that the response to this question came from a very sarcastic Scouser on our team who's now Professor Andrew Jones, but was then a postgraduate at Glasgow. And the question came, what did they look like? And he goes, well, they were people like us. Yeah, but what colour was their skin? And the response in this sarcastic Scouse response was, they look like you. Which you could take any way you want, but it's a brilliant sort of pushback against that sort of kind of, shall we say, quite obviously prejudicial sort of question obsessed with skin color. So anyway, that was really funny. So we had lots of, my point is the site was really popular. It's been popular for decades. A visitor from the States takes away a twig, a cone, and a stone, right? And the stone is what we're interested in, but the biological matter, and there's been debates over. And the problem was, people do this all the time around the world, right? It's not that the problem is with tourism and local vandalism. People are damaging these sites, chipping bit by bit at them, right? It's not the individual act is so mega, so severe. She didn't put dynamite under the monuments. I don't want to give people ideas, but she didn't set a herd of cats on the monument, or she didn't sort of drive a quad bike over them. There's nothing like that. It's small beans, but it's disrespectful. And when you go on social media and then go, look, this is an ancestral artifact. It's look, or something, and you kind of brag about it, and that is what I think leads people to react, right? So then people are saying, well, you could do something, you could rectify this by actually returning the stone, and that's where we're up to. And I think it's not about bullying or harassing any individual. This is about trying to create a constructive discussion. And I think it's, I don't know, I don't want to ask you about your own background, but as someone who's not a witch, people have been questioning anything that involves witchcraft or witches. It's immediately derogatory. And I've known and worked with witches on archaeological sites. I've worked with druids. I've worked with all manner of heathens. I had to. You have to work with. When I say work with, archaeologists who are practicing witches or practicing druids, as well as visitors to the site when I'm working there, local community interest, as well as I've worked with Christian groups. I've worked with, I have visitors who are local, who are Muslim, who are Sikh. We have to work with a range of faith groups, spiritual practices, to help people understand the past. That's what we care about, right? So my take, and while I also roll my eyes sometimes at perhaps some of the terms and things I don't understand, and I'm come across as a bit disrespectful. I think we all try to learn here and be and explain that this isn't representative of what any particular religious group do, and it's a bit of a dick move, and you should return the stones that you take, and you should not take them in the first place. That would have been simpler. So the return the stone. Little Rocky is apparently now coming home, and we want to sort of try and keep this conversation going. But I just love. Sorry to babble on, but I just want to. I just really celebrate your efforts here as to help make this happen. And I'm surprised by how few of my archaeology colleagues have got involved, because I thought this would be a really teachable moment, as they say in the States, for helping people understand about education. But I don't know if any other archaeologists have been in touch with you, or
Not with me. We have reached out to a few other websites. Josephine's been in on it as well, so she's in the comments, as well as Thistle Witch. They've been involved in reaching it out. There's actually a website called Return the Stone, and they're looking at getting the Rosetta Stone back to Egypt.
oh,
Really interesting. So I think we've been reaching out to them, trying to get involved in other projects to get items back to where they should be, because that is basically the crux of it, is people shouldn't be removing these things that belong in a location where they belong. You don't allow that to happen. You don't allow taking from these sites.
and this is a legacy of imperialism, colonialism, and nationalism. Because I'm not an expert on Scottish archaeology, but the tensions, there's layers to it, right? So there's the long-term Scotland, England part of the British Imperial project going militarily and in mercantile terms to other countries and appropriating their archaeology alongside missionizing, alongside extracting resources, alongside military conquest. All of that is a massive mess of stuff to think about, and think of repatriation of cultural treasures in our museums. But it also affects, regional, national, regional, local level. So there's been long anxiety and actual open anger amongst local people around Scotland against their national museum, against the National Museum of Scotland, against Edinburgh sucking up all the best artifacts from as far afield as Lewis, Shetland, Fife, Dumfries, that Edinburgh does a British museum on its own nation in the sense. And I'm long been aware of those debates, and it's important that it's not just about being in the nation. It's not just a national thing. It's about being in the communities, isn't it? I think is that a fair sense?
Yeah, about being in the communities. So the reason it kicked off so much, I think, is because so many people do care about the clavicairns. So many in the local community visit the clavicairns quite regularly. Even those that are not in the witch community, those that aren't religious in any way, will still visit the clavicairns just as a local site. With Outlander, it's become busier. And yeah, I'm not used to going live. I'm sorry.
No, you do. No, it's fine.
That's why I'm fine with you talking. I'm just like, I'll just be here. Yay!
But I mean, no, you're absolutely correct. It's got busier and busier, and the stakes are higher now, aren't they? And we know we're making a mountain out of a rock, but it's important that people are aware that this is, as people are saying in the comments, this is part of a bigger set of conversations about repatriation, indigenous, native ownership, decolonisation, if you like, of our landscapes, and thinking about the responsibilities we all have, whether we work in IT, whether we work, in as a teacher, as a whether we're archaeologists, or whether we're on a building site, whatever. We're all connected into our local landscape, and we all have a responsibility to speak on these issues. And sort of and digitally, this is obviously things get out of proportion sometimes, but and the digital arena gives us that opportunity, doesn't it, to have these conversations.
It opens it up to a larger audience, and you can see what more people think about these topics. So there was a lot of people that were very upset, even though it is just wherever the stone's from, whether it's from the monument itself or the path, it upset a lot of people because it shouldn't have been removed.
No.
So it just shows the internet is wild.
And I suppose the idea that, you see, the problem we have as archaeologists, and I don't know what you'd think about this, is that on one level we want to remind people that we're constantly going on, we must protect these sites, but we never do that, because in the same way as we don't study the past because we care about stuff, we don't care about like human feces from a pit from the Viking York. We care about the story of the person who did that dump, you know, or likewise, or crafted an artifact. We care about the people. And the same way when we're talking about protecting buildings, we're not, people say, oh yeah, you archaeologists care more about that than people. There's people starving in the streets. It's about, if you rob people of the cultural environment, even if those objects were built or made for the rich and famous, for the toffs, for the the exclusive, it still tells a story that links in the rest of the community. And while perhaps in the past we've been a bit too honouring of those great and the good, this is all part of our inheritance, and it's for our future. And so we make these arguments about protection, not because we think that things are more important than people, but because we know there are future generations to come. If we're not responsible custodians for these things, whether it's the Clava cairns, the Culloden battlefield itself, no matter how much of it is a late 19th century recreation of, rather than actually an 18th century battlefield, it's a kind of constructed tourist site in many ways, but it's still deeply meaningful for people, and it tells the story that is important for people, local people, regional people, nations, internationally. So, I just want to say that because I think people think, oh, why do you care about the stone? I don't actually care about the stone. I care about the sites that are for future generations and for people to learn their past and to engage with their story, whether it's a biological ancestors, my ancestors built this, or it's a more general cultural sense of, look, people have come new to this land. They've come from the other side of the world. They've migrated here. They live here now. This is part of their story too now, because they're living here, and I think that's really important. People get that sense. It's not just about local sites for local people in a League of Gentlemen sense. It's about, this is important for everyone.
Definitely. And a lot of the Highlands quite recently has become more of a tourist attraction with things like Outlander, the NC 500. We have been overrun by tourists and we don't have the infrastructure in place to deal with it. So Clava Cairns is literally on the back road. It is in Inverness, but it's on the back road off a single track road. Yeah. It's not built for these bus loads of people coming in all of the time at like 5 bus loads a day. It might not seem like much to somebody living in London, but to somebody living in Inverness, that's like a ridiculous amount. And things like Culloden battlefield, you'll see these monuments that have stuff they've had to hire staff to get rid of these offerings that people are making, because otherwise they just rot away there.
Yeah.
Just end up looking like litter.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because we want people to care, and if people have a spiritual connection to the place, people are going to come, whether people are historical interest. But we've also, it's a double-edged sword, is that brings damage. That brings, even if it's 1 in 1,000 people, there's always one irresponsible person. It's not about castigating all tourists or all American tourists or all ignorant English people, although there's plenty of those. It's not about categorizing all of them. It's just the scale of the impact on these monuments. And yes, the monuments have. I mean, it's not an excuse to say yes, archaeologists have dug them, and they have been ransacked, and yes, they've been damaged at various different stages. And not all landowners are great people. We're not allowed to. Archaeologists are very sensitive about this because we try so hard to have good relations with farmers. Some farmers hate our guts. Some we hate their guts. But we, because some of them they absolutely hate everything because they see archaeologists as the man, as the government. And so I remember, this is a Welsh example, but a recently passed away colleague of mine who Di Morgan Evans, back in the 70s, he was an inspector for the Ministry of Works in Wales. And they said, based in Cardiff, it's the same as Edinburgh for Scotland. It's like, men in suits. And he goes, and they said to him, well, how are you going to go out into the Welsh hills and talk to the farming types? And he goes, well, I'll just talk to them as I normally do in Welsh. And they go, oh, you're a Welsh speaker. Oh, lovely. That helps. And he would, even as a Welsh speaker, he had to be very delicate because not necessarily he was on risk of, a few shotguns, but, he would be in, it depends on how he looked, what he would wear, how he'd approach them. If you talk to them, it could really make a difference of saying, oh, yeah, you've got a really great archaeological site there that you're letting all your your cows literally stomp all over and feed in the middle of. You've put all your hay from the, inside the ancient one. Could you do that somewhere else? And if you want to have those constructive conversations with landowners, with visitors, you've got to have a conversation. You can't just shout at them. If you speak the language, it helps. You speak the accent. You've got an local. The language that helps. And just turning up in a tweed, jacket and going, I say, chaps, can you please stop, moving your tractors all over the rear passageway, please? It's really not a good look for the old, then it's not going to work. They go, yeah, all right, okay, and then they're back to it, So it's difficult, isn't it? And it's never, archaeologists are often in the middle. Sometimes we're loved by local people because we're standing up for their heritage. Other times we're seen as the bad guy, the people damaging and destroying it. And it's important to try and keep that balance. Yeah.
Well, Clavacairns, there's parts of the standing stones that are actually in a farmer's field as well.
Yeah.
So if you go across that single track road, there's another stone. Pretty interestingly. So when you were on about farmers there, I was thinking, yeah, half of the Clavacairns is in a farmer's field. Not half, but...
I did the geophysical survey of that one. I was the one so my results found it. And me and Richard Bradley. Richard is a wonderful chap. He's still alive. He's retired now. We managed to get the results, and we found that stone in the field northeast of the three main passageways is the part of a monument, and we've got the rest of the monument just surviving, but we can see it in the geophysics. And we also surveyed, there's one in the wall between the wall between the field and the Balneo intersection. You can only see there was another smaller mound, and you only see it because the dry stone wall goes over it. So I didn't discover them because we knew they were kind of there, but we revealed them. We did the surveys to confirm they were there. So I feel very proud of that. And I did that as a student. It wasn't a discovery like no one knew, it's a revelation, newspaper headlines, but it was important to show, this is part of a bigger site, much of which has been damaged by ploughing. We can't blame the farmer now. This is like 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 generations of what we up to mechanized ploughing coming in the Highlands and the 1930s, 20s, 30s, I don't know. But 100 years of mechanized ploughing on and off. And, marginal land got ploughed during the First World War and the Second World War because, Atlantic blockade, the war in the Atlantic, food. So a lot of sites were only started to be damaged in the First and Second World Wars. And I'm not anti-EU, but equally the EU's Common Agricultural Policy did a lot of damage to farmers shifting which bits of land they would do what with. And so, we've had a century of, of mechanized ploughing, which has destroyed a lot of sites, not just, and that's on top of the agricultural revolution and stuff. So we've lost so much, Yeah.
I come from farmers, so like a lot of my grandparents, great-grandparents, they were all farmers in the Highlands, so they might have been the ones going over it with the tractor.
Exactly. And it's not about apportioning some kind of eternal blame on individuals. People have to make a living. People have to have houses to be built. Archaeology is not always anti-development. We often try and ask questions. I think it's really, it's not about sort of cursing people forever for in the 1890s actually wanting to eat or have a life. It's about trying to understand that we've got an inheritance, that we have an opportunity now to salvage the fragments we have, I suppose.
Even still there is incredible, really, because if it's about 4,000 years old, amazing that it is still there at all. And it just shows that our ancestors, these people from 4,000 years ago, knew what they were doing when they were building these sites. Because a house built today, that's not going to last 4,000 years.
Well, obviously these sites date. They were built as part of these early farming societies, 2000 BC, 2500 BC, Chalcolithic, early Bronze Age, that. And the Clavacairns are very late because people were building monuments like that in Ireland 1,000 years earlier, in Orkney 1,000 years earlier. So these are a later phenomenon. But the other thing I did want to say was, and I want to correct people, but also say you're not wrong either, is when people are talking about them as Pictish, because I think I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of people, perhaps in North East Scotland, use Pictish just mean old. They're not thinking, and I understand that. There's lots of people use terms that they're actually not Pictish, obviously, because the Pictish as a term is the peoples of northern and eastern Scotland and the islands, and in the sort of 3rd to 9th centuries. It's a very specific historical period that we talk about as an archaeological period. We talk about Pictish, but people may not know this, but again, when we were excavating the Clava cairns the year before I was there, they found a cremation in one of the cairns, and I said, as a joke to Richard Bradley and the team, I said, I hope it's early medieval rather than all this prehistoric nonsense. And they went, yeah. And the radiocarbon dates came back, and this little cremation was Pictish in date. It dated to the Pictish period. So the Clava cairns were not built, not constructed by the Picts. They were already thousands of years old by the time that the Confederacy of Peoples that we call the Picts developed. They were literally already ancient history, but people respected those monuments, and we've got increasing evidence that people in the Pictish period, before and during Christian conversion, were still using these ancient sites for burial. So, it's really interesting that the Clava cairns are not Pictish, and yet I'm not going to correct people who say that, because actually we've got evidence that the Picts, peoples who we would call the Picts, are going to those sites. So, it's in the same way that ancient monuments like Stonehenge were also Roman monuments, in the sense that they weren't built by the Romans, but people were going there in the Roman period, leaving pottery, chipping the stones. They were clearly doing some ritual shit, to use a better term, at Stonehenge in the Roman period. And people that was 2,500, they were already 2,500 years old. So the later phases of Stonehenge are contemporary with the Clava cairns. We're looking at monuments that are already, deep time. And, when you look at TV shows, the popular culture now, we're aware of this idea of ancient monuments that are already ancient in our landscape. So I was just watching Ahsoka, the Star Wars series, and there's the Dathomiri have their ancient stone circles, and they call them henges. This is now in our popular culture. Almost every society has old stone circles in it, and of course we've got these popular culture references like Brave, with the Picts and these ancient stone circles where magical things happen. But the idea is, even in those Disney pop culture representations, these are people that are living in ancient land already in the past. They were aware of these ancient monuments. So I suppose that's really a point to make, is that these are already sort of really ancient sites. And so, yeah, people have been engaging with them for centuries. Yeah. So I think that's really important people know.
They've been engaging with them for centuries. People now still go there for whatever reason. The solstice, the stones line up with the winter solstice, which is quite interesting as well. And
yes, of course, it's got that alignment, hasn't it? And I know that I know they've published it. I haven't actually checked it out, but they've all of those alignments are properly analysed, and they've been properly and experimented. They've actually, I remember, it was just after I was there, they did cover one of the cairns so they could reconstruct the light. Is it midwinter, isn't it? Midwinter sunrise? Am I getting that right? Midwinter sunrise
or sunset? It is the sunset, I believe.
No, sunset. Sorry, yeah, because they're southwest, aren't they? Sorry, yeah, but they reconstructed those solar interactions. So that's part of archaeology too, is experimenting at the actual monuments. Yeah.
Which makes you think, what did they know about the way the sun and that works to have them lined up these ways? Because it could go in with some celebration they had where it lit up the cairns in the winter with the sunlight.
Exactly. And this ideas of regeneration, rebirth, the year remaking itself. We don't know the stories, the legends they would have told, the myths, the actual how the world was made and how it's being remade. But these moments must be really profound, moments for people's religious lives. The darkest time of the year where you're living off your stores, and if anything goes wrong, if you couldn't, if your animals die for any reason, if your crops, your oats, your your grains are get weevil infested or whatever, or wet, you're starving at this time. You really need, you're gonna have to rely on kinship groups. You're gonna have to get through these dark months. It's you can still fish, they're still hunting, but people aren't just living off just farming. But it's really not a nice time. And to think about that profane landscape, that sort of the needs of just getting through a cold winter, and then thinking about how they're thinking about the world. We can't reconstruct it, and so back projecting a single vision from a mixture of sources, we can only guess. But
if you've enjoyed this Archaeodeath video, why not check out the Archaeodeath blog at howardwilliamsblog.wordpress.com.